What happens when the most powerful empire on Earth starts to crumble from within? The signs of decline are everywhere. Skyrocketing debt, military stagnation, political leaders out of touch with the next generation, and a growing mental health crisis. Some analysts argue that the US is headed down the same path as the Soviet Union in its final days, unable to adapt to the changing world while burdened by an unsustainable system. Is America in the midst of a slow-motion collapse? Or is there still time to reverse course and rebuild the foundations that once made the country a global powerhouse? In this video, we'll break down the cracks in America's social, political, and economic structures, issues that threaten its very survival as the dominant global force. Stay with us as we explore these critical themes and their implications for the future of the United States. Chapter 1. The Burden of U.S. Debt. A ticking time bomb. The United States, once a global economic powerhouse, is now spending more on its debt interest than on national defense. In the first quarter of 2024 alone, the U.S. allocated an astonishing $1.059 trillion just to service its national debt. This massive financial burden has surpassed military spending, a historical red flag. Historically, when empires begin to spend more on managing their debt than protecting their borders, it's a clear sign of impending decline. But what does this mean for the future of America's global dominance? What's even more concerning is the U.S. debt to GDP ratio, which now stands at over 120%. This means that the nation's total debt exceeds the entire annual economic output. If left unchecked, this mounting debt could cripple the economy, as more and more resources are funneled into interest payments rather than critical investments in infrastructure, innovation, or even social programs. Rising interest rates only exacerbate the situation, making the debt even more expensive to maintain. It's a vicious cycle. Higher interest rates drive up the cost of borrowing, which then requires more debt to cover these payments. This isn't just an abstract issue for policymakers to worry about. It's a ticking time bomb that could eventually lead to economic stagnation, or worse, a full-scale financial crisis. The ability of the U.S. to lead on the global stage is directly tied to its economic stability, and right now that foundation looks shaky. This debt crisis also reflects deeper structural issues within the U.S. economy. Despite record debt levels, the country is neither in a recession nor engaged in any major war. So why are we borrowing so much? The answer lies in the growing mismatch between government revenue and spending. Over time, entitlement programs and military expenditures have ballooned, while tax revenues have not kept pace. Add to this the Federal Reserve's higher interest rates, and the picture becomes even more grim. Countries like China, which continue to rise economically and militarily, could soon capitalize on America's financial woes. When a nation spends more on servicing its debt than on defense, it signals to rivals that their moment to overtake is near. Could we be witnessing the beginning of America's economic decline? Many analysts think so, and they are urging immediate reforms to avoid what could become an irreversible downfall. Chapter 2. Military Power. A struggling superpower. For decades, the United States has been the unquestioned military leader of the world, wielding unmatched global influence through its superior defense capabilities. However, in recent years, the cracks in this once impenetrable armor have begun to show. Reports in military is suffering from outdated equipment, inadequate training resources, and insufficient infrastructure. These issues have compounded to a point where even members of Congress, like Senator Roger Wicker, are calling for urgent modernization efforts. The question is no longer whether the U.S. military is the strongest in the world, but whether it can remain competitive against rapidly advancing rivals like China. China, in particular, has been expanding its military presence at a breakneck speed, investing heavily in cutting-edge technologies such as artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, and cyber warfare capabilities. As America continues to sink billions into maintaining its aging fleet of aircraft and naval vessels, China is investing in the future. This gap in modernization has raised concerns that the U.S. may be falling behind in key areas of warfare that will define the 21st century. Without military risks losing its competitive edge, which could have catastrophic consequences for its global standing. Moreover, the impact of deferred maintenance and underfunding isn't just a matter of numbers. It affects the morale and effectiveness of the troops. Soldiers and officers alike have reported feeling underprepared and overburdened. The consequences of an overstretched and underfunded military are clear. Operational readiness suffers, and America's ability to project power across the globe. At a time when geopolitical tensions are rising, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, this lack of readiness could prove disastrous. What's more, the military struggles are emblematic of a broader issue within American leadership: a failure to adapt to the changing nature of global conflicts. While traditional warfare remains important, emerging threats like cyber attacks and information warfare require a different kind of preparedness. Yet, the US is still playing catch-up in these areas. This inability to pivot and modernize may leave the US vulnerable in ways it has not experienced before. At the same time, the defense budget remains massive, but it's not being spent in the most effective ways. Billions are poured into legacy systems and projects that no longer meet the needs of modern warfare. Without serious reforms, the US could continue to throw money at outdated strategies, while its competitors leap ahead with more efficient, forward-thinking investments. This raises the stakes for America's future as a military superpower. Will the country rise to the challenge and revitalize its defense capabilities? Or are we witnessing the slow erosion of its global influence? Chapter 3. A Nation Led by the Elderly: The Rise of the Gerontocracy. In a world that is constantly evolving, the leadership of the United States remains strikingly static. As of 2024, President Joe Biden, at 81 years old, and his likely political rival Donald Trump, at 78, represent a growing gerontocracy at the top of American politics. While age alone does not disqualify someone from leadership, the overwhelming presence of elderly figures in power raises questions about the ability of the country to adapt to modern challenges and inspire younger generations. This aging political elite mirrors the final years of the Soviet Union, where stagnation in leadership contributed to the eventual collapse of the regime. The dominance of older leaders in key positions is not just about age, but about the disconnect between the government and the younger, more dynamic segments of society. Many of the policies championed by these leaders are viewed as outdated by a significant portion of the electorate, particularly younger voters. Issues like technology, climate change, and social equality demand innovative, forward-thinking solutions, yet they are often met with reluctance or dismissal by the political establishment. This inability to resonate with the concerns of the younger generation poses a serious threat to the country's political and social cohesion. Another problem with the gerontocracy is the lack of fresh ideas and the entrenchment of outdated policies. When political leaders have been in power for decades, they are often resistant to the kind of transformative changes needed to solve new problems. The challenges facing the US today, economic inequality, the rise of automation, and growing geopolitical threats, require leadership that can think beyond the Cold War-era frameworks many of these aging leaders grew up in. Their inability to address these issues head-on could contribute to America's gradual decline, much like what was seen in the FI. Moreover, an aging leadership often struggles to represent the demographic shifts happening within the country. The US is becoming increasingly diverse, with younger generations growing up in a vastly different world than their predecessors. This generational divide is deepened by leaders who are decades removed from the realities of their constituents' lives. As trust in government institutions continues to erode, this disconnect can only widen. The political system risks alienating not only younger voters, but also marginalized communities who feel their concerns are being ignored by an out-of-touch leadership. Yet, the power of incumbency and political machinery means that change is not easy. Despite growing calls for younger, more progressive leadership, the system itself favors those already in power. With deep financial resources, strong political connections, and name recognition, older politicians can continue to dominate election. This creates a vicious cycle of stagnation, where new ideas struggle to break through the barriers of established power. Chapter 4. Erosion of Trust: A Society Losing Faith in Its Institutions. Public trust in American institutions has reached a historic low, with confidence in key pillars of society plummeting to dangerous levels. In 1979, nearly 50% of Americans expressed trust in institutions like the Supreme Court, Congress, and public schools. Today, that number has fallen to a shocking 26%, mirroring the societal disillusionment seen in the final years of the Soviet Union. This collapse in trust is more than just a statistical drop. It reflects a deeper crisis in American democracy and civil society. The erosion of trust has been driven by several factors, including growing political polarization, economic inequality, and a media landscape that often amplifies division rather than fostering understanding. As scandals, corruption, and ineffective policies continue to make headlines, the American public becomes increasingly cynical about the institutions meant to serve and protect them. Congress, for example, is often seen as gridlocked and out of touch with the everyday concerns of citizens, while faith in the judicial system has been undermined by perceptions of partisanship and unequal justice. One of the most troubling aspects of this decline in trust is the effect it has on social cohesion. Societies where people no longer believe in their institutions tend to become more fragmented and polarized. In the US, this is manifested in a growing divide between different social, political, and economic groups, with many citizens retreating into ideological echo chambers. This division makes it increasingly difficult to find common ground on the most pressing issues, whether it's healthcare reform, climate change, or the role of government in regulating tech giants. Education, once seen as a cornerstone of American success, has also been hit hard by the collapse in trust. Public schools, which were once held up as engines of opportunity and social mobility, are now viewed by many as failing to provide the skills and knowledge necessary for the future. Parents and students alike are questioning whether the education system is equipped to prepare young people for the challenges of the 21st century, further deepening the sense of disillusionment. This lack of faith in public schools mirrors broader concerns about the nation's ability to maintain its competitive edge in a rapidly changing world. The consequences of a society losing faith in its institutions are profound. When people no longer trust the mechanisms of government, they are less likely to participate in civic duties like voting, and more likely to support radical or authoritarian alternatives. This opens the door to social instability, as seen in other countries where institutional decay has led to unrest and regime change. If the United States fails to address the underlying causes of this loss of trust, it risks sliding into a period of political instability and social fragmentation that could challenge the very foundations of its democracy.
Chapter 5. The Mental Health Crisis, a Nation in Despair. Beyond the political and economic challenges, the United States is facing a deepening mental health crisis that is taking a devastating toll on its population, particularly among young people. Recent studies show that American high school girls are experiencing unprecedented levels of depression and suicidal thoughts, with rates of mental distress reaching all-time highs.
The broader population is also struggling, as deaths from despair, including suicides and drug overdoses, have surged across all demographics. This crisis is not just a healthcare issue. It's a reflection of deeper societal dysfunction that threatens the well-being and future of the nation. One of the most concerning aspects of this mental health epidemic is its disproportionate impact on the youth. Teenagers today are growing up in a world marked by constant social media exposure, economic uncertainty, and the existential threat of climate change. These factors contribute to a pervasive sense of anxiety and hopelessness, with many young people feeling that the traditional pathways to success are increasingly out of reach. The pressure to succeed in a hyper-competitive environment only adds to the burden, leaving many feeling overwhelmed and isolated. The rise in substance abuse and opioid addiction is another symptom of this widespread despair. Entire communities, particularly in rural areas, have been ravaged by the opioid epidemic, with thousands of lives lost each year. The crisis has strained the healthcare system, as more resources are required to treat addiction. But the root causes, lack of economic opportunity, social isolation, and inadequate mental health support, remain largely unaddressed. Without systemic changes, this cycle of despair is likely to continue, with long-lasting effects on families, communities, and the nation as a whole. A contributing factor to this mental health crisis is the growing sense of social disconnection in American society. The traditional support systems, family, community, and religious institutions have weakened over time, leaving many without the emotional and psychological safety nets that once provided resilience in times of hardship. As trust in institutions declines and economic pressures mount, individuals are increasingly left to fend for themselves, often leading to feelings of abandonment and despair. The loss of a sense of belonging can be as damaging to mental health as any economic or physical challenge. This mental health crisis also highlights the disparity between the nation's wealth and its well-being. Despite being one of the richest countries in the world, the United States is witnessing a decline in life expectancy, a metric that underscores the serious health and social issues facing the country. Chronic stress, poor access to affordable health care, and inadequate mental health services are all contributing to this decline. If left unchecked, this crisis could further erode the social fabric of the nation, making it harder to address other critical challenges like economic inequality and PUE. Chapter 6. The Elite Disconnect. A nation divided by class and opportunity. As the gap between the elite and the average American continues to widen, the U.S. is increasingly becoming a nation of two distinct realities. The Ivy League graduates and the wealthy elite, who dominate corporate and political power, live in a world of privilege and opportunity. Meanwhile, the majority of the population struggles with stagnant wages, rising living costs, and a dwindling sense of upward mobility. This stark divide between the elites and the rest of the country is driving increasing social unrest and economic inequality, an alarming trend that mirrors the societal fractures seen in the late stages of the Soviet Union. The American elite, particularly those in politics, media, and business, often appear disconnected from the daily struggles of ordinary citizens. For the upper class, access to quality education, healthcare, and financial security is a given. However, for the average American, these are luxuries that seem increasingly out of reach. The student debt crisis, rising housing prices, and a lack of affordable healthcare are issues that disproportionately affect the middle and lower classes. Yet these topics often receive little more than lip service from those in power. The frustration and disillusionment with the elite's inability or unwillingness to address these problems is palpable across the country. At the heart of this growing divide is the notion that the American dream, once a symbol of hope and opportunity, is slipping away for many. The promise that hard work and determination could lead to success is no longer the reality for a significant portion of the population. Instead, the wealthiest Americans have accumulated even more power and influence, while the middle and working classes bear the brunt of economic downturns and stagnant wages. This income inequality is not just a financial issue, it's a political and social one, threatening the very foundation of the nation's democratic ideals. Furthermore, the divide extends beyond economics into cultural and political arenas. The elite tend to have vastly different perspectives on social and political issues compared to the general public. Many policies pushed by elites, such as those on globalization, immigration, and trade, are seen as beneficial to the upper class, but detrimental to. This disconnect fuels populist movements on both the left and the right, as disenfranchised citizens turn to radical alternatives in the hopes of reclaiming their voices and improving their economic standing. The risk of ignoring this growing chasm is immense. As history has shown, when elites become too isolated from the needs and concerns of the general population, societal collapse is often not far behind. Whether through peaceful reform or more radical upheaval, the U.S. must find a way to bridge this gap before it becomes too wide to cross. The future of American democracy and social stability depends on whether the nation can address this elite disconnect and restore a sense of fairness and opportunity for all. Conclusion. The path forward. Will America rise again? As we've seen, the challenges facing the United States are not only vast, but deeply interconnected. From the crippling debt that eats away at national resources to the increasing alienation between the elite and the average American, these issues mirror the decline of other great powers throughout history. Yet, while the U.S. faces immense obstacles, there remains a chance to turn the tide if the nation can unite around the urgent need for reform and innovation. It's a call to action for policymakers, businesses, and citizens alike to rebuild trust in institutions, modernize military and economic systems, and invest in the mental and physical well-being of the population. If you believe in the importance of discussing these critical issues and want to support our work in bringing them to light, consider subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue producing in-depth analysis and thought-provoking content aimed at understanding the key F. Together we can foster conversations that lead to real change.